सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Every once in a while, we do some storytelling in Cut The Clutter, and I know you like it and you ask for it more often. However, we are careful because there are stories and stories and stories. There has to be a good occasion and good reason for us to dedicate an entire episode to telling a story. Now, if you need a good occasion, there can't be one better than what we have today, which is the 25th anniversary of the Pokhran nuclear tests, 1998. On this day, 25 years back, that is 11th of May, Vajpayee government carried out the tests, overtly and clearly stated nuclear weapons tests. The last one that Mrs. Gandhi carried out in 1974, that had the pretense of being a peaceful nuclear explosion. This time there was no such pretense. This was a test of nuclear weapons. That happened 25 years back. That's why it's a good time to tell you the story of how we got to that point. And these are things that I've recorded in the past, that I've written about in the past. During the Vajpayee era, when the tests happened, before that, in fact, in the 15 or so years before that as well. And that's the story I'm going to tell you today. So if I take you back, India's march to Pokhran 1998 was long, complex and dangerous. It also involved hundreds of secret steps and actions, and even if one had been betrayed, the whole operation would have been compromised. The 25th anniversary of the Pokhran-2 nuclear tests is being marked today in a rather muted fashion. But if India ever decided to single out a date for making some sort of an anniversary of its nuclear weaponization, 18th March 1989 would be a pretty good choice. Probably even more fitting than the two dates of May 1974 and 1998, Pokhran 1 and 2 respectively. Rajiv Gandhi was now in the last few months of his prime ministership. He had suffered a great deal of attrition from fighting both internal and external crisis. Internal crisis, there was Bofors, the Ram Janmabhoomi movement was on, there was Bofors, there was a Type 209 submarine scam, or at least the notion of his beef of a scam. There was many other vulnerabilities, also IPKF operations which had not gone right, his intervention in Sri Lanka. So he had gone through many crises, Operation Exercise Brass Tacks, which had led to a near warlike situation with Pakistan, which then had to be de-escalated. So he had suffered many setbacks. Yet, on national security and foreign policy, Rajiv Gandhi had not lost the focus in the least. Some frantic searching of our nuclear basements and barsatis, whatever you call them, during the Brass Tacks crisis, that's when India and Pakistan came close to a war, it had revealed that our deterrent was far from ready and that the complacency that 1974 had created was dangerous. Also by early 1989, it became evident that Pakistan was either very close to a deliverable weapon or already had one. Americans were already talking of Pakistan being a last turn of the screw, I say that in quotes, a last turn of the screw away from the bomb. Sure enough, 1989 was the last year the US administration gave Pakistan their annual certificate of nuclear virginity. Since then, they haven't given it. Even though they were desperate to save Pakistan from sanctions, the good jihad in Afghanistan was at its peak. Americans were very much a part of it and Pakistan was a stalwart ally. Yet, they were not able to give this certification because without this certification to the Congress, Americans would not have been able to transfer a certain aid, particularly military aid and equipments to Pakistan. So 1989 was the last year. That was as clear a signal as possible to the entire world and to India that Pakistan already had a nuclear weapon now. It was in this setting on 18th of March 1989 that the Indian Air Force, IAF, decided to hold a massive air power display at its firing ranges of Tilpat on the southeastern edge of Delhi. It seems that Rajiv Gandhi made up his mind in the course of that remarkable display by 129 aircraft, almost a third of the effective IAF order of battle then. He gestured to then Defense Secretary Naresh Chandra, to follow him into a tent, even shaking off a curious Rajesh pilot. It is nearly impossible for me to reconstruct an authentic account of what exactly happened in the tent. I've written about it maybe a couple of decades back, but it's impossible to reconstruct it exactly because we haven't spoken to everybody who was there. But from what I have been able to gather and what I've been hearing from various participants through the years, direct and indirect, in what was to become the most spectacular and successful secret operation, also perhaps the longest in India's history, secret operation, it seems that even with his power fading now, Rajiv had decided that the time had come for India to give up all pretense of peaceful nukes and develop a full-fledged arsenal. That he put Naresh Chandra in charge of it is a fact that I have confirmed with several members of the nuclear core group, as it was called. Naresh Chandra himself, it's been written about while he was around. I have written about him when he was around in his role. Also, it's been confirmed with and by several successive prime ministers. Although most are still shy of sharing any more details of this remarkable operation that unfolded subsequently. The core group mandated to develop the nuclear arsenal included V.S. Arunachalam. He was then the head of DRDO. Sometimes we used to joke about him because it was under his watch that DRDO started developing light combat aircraft, which has now become Tejas. It was taking too long, so we used to joke about it, calling it LCA stands for, we used to say LCA stands for Last Chance for Arunachalam. He was a brilliant mind, brilliant, terrific mind, a very young scientist at that point. So he was then heading DRDO. He was a member of the core group, did a remarkable job with the weapons program, nuclear weapons program. It included renowned nuclear scientists P.K. Iyengar, R. Chidambaram, Anil Kakodkar, and K. Santi Santhanam. Missile man APJ Abdul Kalam, Muthuswamy Balachandran of the Terminal Ballistic Research Lab located in Chandigarh, and some others. I'm not sure if the number ever added up to a dozen, but this was a tough gang to handle. These were highly talented, motivated, and in some cases individualistic men, as scientists often tend to be. Rajiv probably chose Naresh Chandra, to head this group because he knew it would need an experienced administrator, an experienced, trustworthy and discreet civil servant to network the system and cut a few corners where needed. A decision was taken to keep the whole operation totally secret and out of the system. There will therefore be not a scrap of paper found anywhere in the records of PMO or the cabinet. How secret it was and what kind of role even the scientists played, that is something about which full books should be written about. But I will only take you back to a conversation that I had on Walk the Talk with Professor Anil Kakodkar, and he spoke about it himself. I asked him, I will share a link with you of the conversation. I asked him, how does India's nuclear community always manage to fool all of the world, intelligence agencies, particularly the CIA? Professor Kakodkar said, and I quote him exactly from that Walk the Talk, it's not a question of fooling, it's a question of understanding how things work and working out your strategy in that context. At that time for me to travel, the question was, listen to this carefully, at that time for Professor Kakodkar to travel, it was important that if I booked an airline ticket, it obviously will get recorded that I went from one place to another so somebody can track it. So one of the things is not to leave a trail. I have taken the risk of traveling under wrong names. This is Professor Kakodkar speaking. So somebody can put me in jail. Hey, who are you? You're traveling under a fake name. I'm adding that. So again, I asked him a follow-up question that of course now you will be caught with biometric and all, but now you don't have to do it. When you did it, there was no biometric. So he again responded, Professor Kakodkar, he said, not now, but for that matter, you meet some people with a kind of different name or a different identity. Sometimes it does backfire and then you get into an immediate crisis management. And then he goes on to tell us the story. He says, so I had got into several such embarrassing situations. So I asked him again, will you tell us one without the details of name and place? Now says Professor Kakodkar again in that Walk the Talk, there are several. Actually, I went somewhere and somebody was to come and receive me. I was told that the person knows me by the name Mr. Rao. So Professor Kakodkar became Mr. Rao. And I forgot that. He forgot that. So the person came and that person was unknown to me. He said, hello, Mr. Rao. And I said, I am not Rao, I am Kakotkar. And then I realized that I was supposed to be Mr. Rao. So again I asked him, was he Indian or foreign? Professor Kakotkar said, Indian. For this kind of work, no question of using any foreigners. For this kind of work, foreigners ka sawal hi nahi hota, he said. Again I asked him, but you covered it somehow, you covered up for it somehow. And he said, yes. As in, he was also a part of the same program. Again, I asked him, but you try to create cutouts everywhere? That is what is done in covert operations? And he said, yes, because you asked me this question, how do you maintain secrecy? One element is not to leave a trail. There are many methods of not leaving a trail. Yet again, a follow-up question from me. In your business, you had to be not just a scientist, but also an intelligent czar in a way. My professor, Steve Cohen, always used to say, whenever we asked him, how come CIA has missed both of India's nuclear tests? So Professor Cohen's reply was that the CIA missed India's tests because the CIA does not read anything that is not marked classified. And the BJP's manifesto in 1998 elections was not marked classified. So they never read it. If they had only read it, they would have known that BJP was going to test as soon as it came to power. Then Kakotkar said, we also say similar things. After 1974 Pokhran test, one of the people said that we were able to keep secrets because we don't keep minutes of our meetings or anything we do. It's all in the heads. So I said, in those days, there were no emails, SMSs. Lesser the electronics, the better. Lesser the paper, the better. And Professor Kakotkar said, for example, all that I did, we had to write annual appraisals, annual reports, but there is not one word about this work anywhere for any of his scientists or about him by his superiors. So I brought back that conversation with Professor Kakotkar with you to tell you how covert this operation was. And it was not necessarily carried out by spies. It was carried out by very good scientists, very good globally respected scientists. A novel, if irregular way of providing funds for this operation was found. Because, you might ask me that, look, it's one thing for India to run such a covert operation, but this will cost a lot of money, and this very conservative system with so much accounting, auditing, how do you find the money? The system that was evolved was quite remarkable, and that system to date remains one of India's very well kept secrets, even though many who made it possible are still around. As in when the scientists needed money, Naresh Chandra merely took a note directly to the finance secretary of the day and the minister of the day, who signed it without asking questions. The money was to come out of allocations provided in the annual union budgets under a nondescript science and technology budget for the planning commission. Of course, the financial advisor at Yojana Bhavan as well as the prying auditors of the CAG had been advised not to get curious about where this money was going. The other side of this phenomenal operation was the acquisition, often from global markets, of materials required for weapons as well as missile programs in spite of the sanctions. It is still too early in our history for us to describe this in greater detail. But contemporary historians might ask what a brilliant, if mercurial Santi Santhanam was doing on a desk in RAW, Research and Analysis Wing, on a full-fledged tenure. Suffice it to say that you won't have a scientist of his repute and stature reading clips from Pakistani newspapers or researching clips from Pakistani newspapers and putting out analysis in front of the bosses at RAW. He was doing no such thing. It is also important to mention one more vital fact. In the course of this entire operation, which lasted from 1989 to 1998, not one Indian scientist, diplomat or spook was ever caught or even reported for any irregular nuclear trade. These were years when Pakistani nuclear smugglers and thieves were leaving their fingerprints, footprints and calling cards all over the world. So it is only fair that I do not tell you any more details on this, because even journalists must accept the principle of keeping some facts time-barred. But I can mention a few important ones. One, that this operation spanned the tenure of 7 prime ministers between Rajiv Gandhi and Vajpayee. And not only did it remain intact, it acquired strength and momentum, and not one word about it was ever leaked. Never. In fact, when Devagowda sent Naresh Chandra as his ambassador to Washington, he decided that his own trusted Karnataka cadre civil servant Satish Chandran would take over as the keeper of the family silver, or maybe as the keeper of the family plutonium. And isn't it remarkable that both the family silver or family plutonium and the secrecy around it were preserved even through the periods of political instability and short tenure, daily wage paid governments? I can never forget a philosophical statement that I.K. Gujral, who was then Prime Minister, made to some of us editors. He had called a bunch of editors to meet him because he wanted to brief us on the Chemical Weapons Convention Treaty, Chemical Weapons Ban Convention that India was going to sign. And that was going to be announced, and he was concerned that the media might think that somehow India's strategic interests were being signed away. That is a convention that the whole world was signing, and India was also signing. So he had called a large group of editors. As he told us that India had decided to sign the Chemical Weapons Convention, and surprise of surprises, notified that it was destroying its chemical arsenal, and also it was inviting international UN inspectors to certify that its chemical weapons arsenal was indeed destroyed and no more existed, right? Now, this was a big surprise to us. And I said, look, not much earlier, India had signed an agreement with Pakistan, solemnly affirming that India had no such arsenal. In fact, both India and Pakistan had signed this agreement saying that each one had no such arsenal. So, jhoot bola, we lied then, and now we were telling the world that we had this arsenal and we were not destroying it because we were signing the Chemical Weapons Ban Convention. Gujral was sharing with us, group of editors, the nuances of this decision, and then he said somewhat philosophically, when I asked him that how come we are now telling the world that we had nuclear weapons when we signed solemn agreements with Pakistan the other day saying we have no such weapons. And he said, isn't it remarkable how our country has been able to keep its secrets? You can understand great people like Nehru and the Gandhis being able to do so. But then so many of us ordinary men like us, and the expression he used was a very Punjabi expression. He said, Hamare jaise kai lallu panju, that is Tom, Dick and Harry. It's a bad translation, but that's the least words I can do. He said, but then so many of us ordinary men, lallu panjus like us, have been in these jobs lately. These were short-term prime ministers. And yet nobody has found out what we did not want anybody finding out. India's march to Pokhran 1998 was long, complex and dangerous. It also involved hundreds of secret steps and actions, and even if one had been betrayed, the whole operation would have been compromised. These operations range from completely novel funding in a system littered with auditors, which I explained to you, to repeated exercises with IAF Jaguars and then Mirage 2000s to test the bomb devices and to develop tactics. From the nuclear core group to the pilots of these aircraft, scores, if not hundreds of people shared this confidence. Nobody betrayed it. Or Buddha would not have smiled a second time in May of 1998. Now, there was a time, there was a talk of a mole. And this talk, there was a strong rumor that there was a mole in Narasimha Rao's cabinet who leaked to Clinton administration his intention to test a nuclear device. And then the Americans came calling and put a great deal of pressure, and he then pulled back. Now, by talking loosely of a mole, I had then said as well, by talking loosely of a mole, we do an incredible amount of injustice and disservice to the men and women who made this miracle of May 1998 possible. Of course, the people who mattered, Vajpayee, Brajesh Mishra, even Manmohan Singh, who, as Narasimha Rao's finance minister, readily signed those funds away, and countless sheets of paper authorizing these spendings. All of them know better. That they have chosen to stay above petty politics on this speaks about their sagacity and maturity, entirely in keeping with the character of this 9-year operation.